Hey, thanks for tuning in to Ducks as Allies in the Midwestern Vineyard. This is a slide deck presentation of the results of a 3-year project about livestock integration in a cold climate vineyard. My name is Kerri Meyer, and I send you greetings from Good Courage Farm, which is located in Hutchinson, Minnesota, on Wapakute and Mdewakanton territory. Our farm makes reparations through the Indian Land Tenure Foundation. Glad that you're tuning in. We're going to talk about what we did in this research project over 3 years, what we learned, and how you might do it too, whether you are a vineyard owner or a duck owner or considering regenerative stacked practices on your own farm. So before you commit to the time to watching this whole slide deck presentation, I just want to kind of summarize up front. This is the too long, didn't watch the whole thing version. After 3 years of running ducks in our cold climate vineyard, we do think that this is a viable stacked function for regenerative farms, especially if you are already interested in integrating poultry with your perennial fruit crops. We have seen modest improvements in soil fertility. We actually extended our project to a 3rd season, and we haven't really seen too many efficiencies in weed management. We'll talk about that in detail. This is not a profitable practice the way that we did it in this research project. It maybe isn't even good for the bottom line because in the north you have to winter your flocks over, which we didn't build into the cost benefit analysis in our research project, but we'll talk about it. The best part about this project is that after 3 years of running ducks in our vineyard and running food safety tests on our fruit, we have had 0 detectable foodborne pathogens, which we think is really exciting for folks out there who want to farm regeneratively and do livestock integration in ways that are safe for people who consume our food. We did this in part to respond to encroaching insect pressure, especially Japanese beetles and vineyard snails. The thing is that none of those problems showed up in the last 3 years, so we haven't had a real chance to test it. Stay tuned. And to summarize, we're going to keep doing this. We've done it for 3 years now, and we're going to do it for the foreseeable future. And we'll talk about why. I want to gratefully acknowledge that this is a SARE-funded grant project. So we're super grateful for the collaboration of our friends at North Central Sustainable Agriculture Research and Education, who made this 3-year project possible. If you haven't done on-farm applied research at your place yet, but you're thinking about it, I really encourage you to reach out to the Farmer Rancher Grant Program for your regional SARE. So some of the inspiration behind taking this on as a research project come from both the successes that we've had with livestock integration in other parts of our farm and the needs and challenges that still face us, and in particular in the vineyard. Before this farm became a fruit farm, it had been under corn for 50 plus years, and until we were here, there hadn't really been attention to soil restoration after those generations of corn farming. And we're hoping to continue to farm regeneratively and learn about restoring the soil, and so we wanted to continue to use livestock as part of that restoration work. So we have successfully used chickens in our orchards and in our asparagus fields. We use goats to manage brush and to knock down our cover crops. And we wanted to turn our attention to the vineyard, which has some of the poorest soil on the whole farm, which grapes will tolerate, but it was time to do some soil renewal work there, and we wanted animals to be a part of it. So figuring out how to do livestock integration here in Minnesota is constrained by the 91-20 rule, which, if you're not familiar with it, the 91-20 rule is part of the Food Safety Modernization Act and also part of the National Organic Program. And it's a required waiting period between the application of raw manure and the harvesting of food crops. So if you have food crops that are in contact with the soil, you have a 120-day waiting period between the last application of raw manure and the harvesting of the food. For us growing perennials, we have a 90-day waiting period because our food isn't typically in contact with the soil. We're really interested in this project because it might contribute to shifting the discourse and the policy around regenerative practices at small scales, while still demonstrating commitment, unwavering commitment to food safety for the people who consume our food. But I just want to say, just on the whole, I'm a big fan of the 91-20 rule, because if you grow lettuce and if you have ducks anywhere near that lettuce, I will not buy your food. But we're looking for some nuance and some flexibility in the NOP and FSMA regulations when it comes to non-soil contact perennial crops and ways to keep animals and people healthy in these integrated systems. So another part of the answer to the question of why ducks is another question, which is why not something else? Why not sheep? Why not chickens? We don't have sheep, and we didn't want to take on a whole new kind of livestock. But also we discovered, thanks to another SARE-funded farmer rancher researcher, that sheep are maybe not the way to go. So thanks to Cami, who did Project FNC 191193, and discovered that sheep, even with grazing muzzles on, will do a lot of damage to your vines. So we decided not to go with sheep. Chickens, we have some experience with, and poultry are definitely a better fit for our goals because we wanted to manage weeds and insect pests, and sheep aren't going to manage your bugs, because we're dealing with some insect pests here. We have spotted winged Drosophila in our other soft fruit crops, and the Japanese beetles are coming for us, expanding their range from the east, and so we know that those are going to be a real pressure in the next decade. Vineyard snails are a thing in Minnesota, and so we wanted to go with poultry, but chickens are maybe not the best fit. We know that chickens with their scratching habit can be a little destructive to the root zone of a plant, and while a mature standard size apple tree can stand up to that, we were worried about the grapes sustaining damage to their root zone with chickens. Chicken poop is a lot hotter, a lot higher in nitrogen than duck poop is, and so we were a little bit worried about the hot manure there. And most importantly, chickens can, I mean, they can fly a little bit, and so what we pictured was a bunch of chickens hanging out in our 6-wire trellis, eating the fruit as soon as it started to ripen. So no chickens. So we already had ducks going into this project, and we had used them in our orchard and seen some of the samples of their work managing grass, and we were pretty satisfied. Here's just a shot of what it looks like. To the right of that electric netting in this image is the grass where ducks have been for 3 weeks, and to the left is where they haven't been, and we've even taken a pass with the mower. So ducks do a pretty good job keeping the orchard floor tidy. So ducks it is. We decided to go with ducks because they're easier on the root zone. They're great at foraging grubs. Their manure is a little cooler, and they can't get to the fruit even if they want to. Plus, we had also lived in Northern California where some organic vineyards were already trying ducks, and we were kind of inspired because our farm is a public space. We're home to a nonprofit organization. In Cape Town, there's an agritourism place that charges tickets to come watch the ducks go to the vineyard to work every day, and so we went with ducks. And I mean, I took home the class ducklings in 2nd grade, so how much harder could this be? It's not hard, but it's not easy either. So here we go, ducks. So here are the 5 questions that we set out to answer in this research project. 1, does this work? 2, what do you need in order to make it work in terms of equipment, and how are you gonna do this somewhere cold like Minnesota? Because a lot of the places that are using ducks are in Mediterranean climates. Um, Question number 3, can this be cost effective with income from eggs and meat? Became pretty clear after season 1. We can't answer that question. That's just too big a question. The meat, the eggs, the profitability, the work that it takes to wash and pack eggs, the fact that it takes so much longer to pluck a duck carcass than it does a chicken. We didn't answer question number 3. Question number 4 was, how many birds are you going to need and how often are you going to move them? And the question that ended up being most interesting for us was, is this safe? Can you use ducks in a vineyard in a short growing season and not incur food safety risks? So a little bit about our vineyard. Um, It had already been established when we purchased the farm back in 2019. It was already 4 years in the ground and was producing. We're in Zone 4B here in Minnesota, and our vineyard is on a slope. It's about as far away as you can get on our place from the barnyard. So it's kind of out there. We have sandy loam soil, and a lot of vines of a lot of different varieties, both seedless dessert grapes and grapes that here in Minnesota are typically used for juice or for wine. And when we bought the farm, there was what's called a modified Geneva double curtain trellis, um, which is great for really dry conditions, but it was too dense in terms of vegetation for a humid climate where we have a lot of fungal pressure. So we removed the 3-foot cordons of the vines, but left the trellis wire in place. And we only run the grapes on the 6-foot high wire, and we have cordon trellised double rows. The prior owners had put plastic mulch in place in the vineyard when they put it in the ground in 2015. For a number of reasons, we are not fans of plasticulture in perennial production. And in particular in the vineyard, having the plastic in place sort of made all of this work to have ducks able to weed and fertilize, it made it just not work. So we've been steadily working over the past 6 seasons to remove the plastic from both the control rows and the research rows in our vineyard. So in the right-hand picture, you can see an aerial shot of our farm. Again, the vineyard is pretty far away from the barnyard. It's also super far away from the hydrant that was in place at the beginning of this project. Um, and it's adjacent to our CRP wetland. We're in prairie pothole country out here. The research rows were the last 20% of the vineyard there, you can see indicated, and there's a picture of them there. If you're going to do this, if you're going to plan, especially from the ground up, to have an integratable vineyard where you could run ducks if you wanted to, think about this. Think about, where are you going to get your water from? Because you cannot have ducks without a reliable water supply. And in advance, think about what kind of ground cover are you going to use in your rows. Are you going to mulch? Are you going to use live green? Are you going to do black plastic, which we're not fans of? And then what are you going to put in the aisles? And you might want to ask what's adjacent to your vineyard, because what's interesting is it kind of didn't matter what was planted in the aisles of our vineyard. It was a mix of fescue and clover, but the native forbs and grasses in the CRP wetland absolutely outcompete the fescue and the clover. And so what was adjacent to our vineyard has become what is in our vineyard. And then think about as you're planning to trellis your vines, or as you look at what you already have if you have a vineyard, how does your trellising system and the configuration of your rows impact how you're going to fence, how you're going to move portable duck housing around? These are things that we kind of needed to figure out about our vineyard as we went into this project. And about the ducks, we have mostly Ancona ducks. We have some Swedish black ducks as well, and then a couple generations of Ancona Swedish crosses. We had hoped to improve our breeding stock as part of this research grant, but HPAI has really thrown a wrench into that. We'll talk about that more. Ancona ducks, we're pretty big fans of them. They are dual purpose, so you can count on them to lay reliably throughout the year. They're a good flavored meat bird if you're interested in butchering. They've been pretty cold hardy. They go out even in sub-zero temps in the winter here in Minnesota, and they've been generally very healthy. They don't fly over the 48-inch fence that we use, and they love to forage. And they go out in the morning and they are ready to work. They are ready to find insects. They are ready to deplete the seed bank. They're pretty calm. They're easy to herd from one area of the farm, one area of the vineyard to another. It's important to know that ducks in general and Anconas in particular have aggressive drakes. Never towards people, but they are very aggressive maters, and they can do some damage to your females. The ratio of drakes to hens in our flock has got to be 1 to 10 at a minimum. 1 to 20 is probably better. The hens are passable mothers. We let some of them brood, and they did an okay job. These are not a recognized breed, but we really like them and we're going to stick with them. Plus, they're attractive. So, we've got some grapes, we've got some ducks, and now we're going to put them together. Here are the methods that we used in this research project. We had some control rows, and we had some what we called duck rows, the research rows. They contained the same varieties of grapes so that we could just sort of by observation see how were the Trollhaugen grapes doing, how were the Somerset grapes doing. And we also harvest those varieties at the same time so that the food pathogen tests with our control and research rows, had good validity. So we did some baseline soil testing to see where we started. Then we selected some trios of breeding ducks and we incubated eggs. We did raise some ducklings to grow out our flock to the desired density. You should know that raising ducklings takes a lot of effort. We'll talk about that more. We moved the mature ducks out to the grapes early in the summer, and we moved them through the research rows, refencing them every 3 weeks, ideally. But once we ran into the challenges in the existing infrastructure, it ended up stretching to 4 weeks and sometimes even 6 weeks, because moving them ended up being kind of onerous. We pulled the ducks from the vineyard 2 weeks prior to harvest, which you'll note is in violation of the 9120 rule. So we did not sell this fruit. We integrated the newly hatched birds in with the mature birds later in the summer. And then at harvest time, we sent our grapes to a food safety testing lab to test them. We'll talk about that. We also did some post-season soil testing. And then we wintered the ducks over and we repeated it. Wintering the ducks over is not just an afterthought. Like, that's a whole other saga that we didn't incorporate into the design of this project. And I'll talk about it briefly, but it's a blank in this project that you're going to need to fill in. So again, in the control rows, we had drip irrigation, but out where the ducks were, we mostly fertigated with the duck pool water. We didn't turn the drip irrigation on in those rows. In the control rows, we did mowing and weed whipping, and in the research rows, the ducks did it. They just used their flappy feet to make little tatami mats out of the grapes, or out of the grass rather, and they ate the vegetation. In our control rows, we do what we usually do to work on our soil fertility. We used pelletized chicken manure, which we have to buy and gets shipped in and we have to apply, and some sulfur to try to bring our pH down. And in the duck rows, the ducks replaced those practices. So here we've laid out our soil test results over the 3 seasons. We've got the baseline at the top and then the final at the bottom there. Um, and some of the things that we're pretty excited about, you can kind of look at these numbers here, but we finished the 3-year project with, I think, a modest but significant improvement in our organic matter, and it compared favorably to the control rows. We started out at 3.3 in both the control and the duck rows, and with our usual practices of, you know, putting pelleted manure down and replacing the plastic mulch with wood chips, adding sulfur. This is where we ended up. We had 3.4% in our control rows, but 4% organic matter in the duck rows. So they have contributed, I think, to the fertility of the research rows. And one of the things that you can't see because I don't know how to move my tiny head on this video presentation is that the pH dropped from 7.8, which is out of the range for grapes. It's too alkaline for grapes to be able to take up, micronutrients. It dropped to 7.1, which is an appreciable acidification of the soil, which we weren't getting with sulfur. In the control rows where we put sulfur on, we got it down to 7.5, and we had to, purchase that sulfur product and apply it. One of the things that's worth noting is that the potassium levels have gone up, interestingly, in both the control rows and the duck rows. In the duck rows, they went up just a little bit more, to the point where there's something happening in our soil where potassium is actually out of range. There are some viticulturists who wouldn't want to see the potassium quite that high. But overall, we're pretty happy with the soil test results. We are also really happy with our food safety test results, which are on the next slide and sneak preview. They're 0. But I want to talk about how we get there from the field to 0 foodborne pathogens. We employ all the good agricultural practices that we can to bring the fruit from the field where the ducks have been during the 90 and 120-day period into our cooler in a way that's safe. So during harvest, we have absolutely no soil contact with harvest bins. In clean orchards, we will let our field crews double stack bins on the ground so that the harvest bin that contains the food is stacked inside another bin that contacts the soil. But in the duck rows, there was absolutely no soil contact with harvest bins. Everything stayed up off the ground on the sanitized metal cargo area of our UTV. And we divided our field crew into clean and dirty team members, meaning that if you were a clean team member, the only thing you touched were your own snips and the fruit. If you needed anything else touched, the steering wheel of the UTV or like a clip that had been holding a vine to the trellis wire, only dirty members of the field crew touched that, just to make sure there was some extra buffer space between the poop and the food. Post-harvest, no field boots from the vineyard go into the pack shed, so there was a clean person back at the pack shed to receive fruit. And we did do a sanidate rinse post-harvest on the fruit before we put it into the cooler, just to add some extra protection. We're not really big fans of using a sanidate on grapes pre-cooler because we find that the sanidate's pretty harsh on the skins of the grape berries, and it tends to reduce the shelf life in the cooler. But we wanted to take every possible measure to make sure that we weren't even introducing pathogens into our cooler. Ta-da! 3 years of negative food pathogen tests. Everything came back undetectable for E. coli, for Listeria, and for Salmonella. We didn't harvest the third variety of DM95 and the fourth variety of Edelmina in the fourth year because of the grape conditions. But everything came back clean. In part, I think, to our good agricultural practices and to the fact that we're integrating ducks into, a perennial food crop where we're growing that food at 6 feet off of the ground. So there's some real buffers there between us and pathogens that could cause illness. So on to ducks as weeders. That picture that I showed you early on of the successful management of grass underneath our orchards, there's nothing like that out in the vineyard, and mostly because of the fact that the vineyard is adjacent to this prairie wetland, and all of those prairie plants are encroaching, plus some noxious weeds. So I can tell you with confidence from our observations that ducks can effectively manage clover, ryegrass, fescue. They like trefoil. They will deplete the seed bank of dandelion in an orchard or vineyard floor. No problem, but do not give them any deep-rooted prairie grasses, no stemmy stuff, no native forbs, and they are not a fan of creeping thistle. It will even give them bumblefoot if they tend to step on it often, and they won't eat lamb's quarter, especially when it gets all woody. So the vegetation management, mixed results. So here's a shot of the vineyard early in the season. You can see that in the middle of the aisles, where the fescue and the clover prevail, they could keep it pretty low, but you can see some of the blue stems starting to shoot up around the bases of the trellis posts, around the bases of the vines. And then by later in the season, it was pretty much a white clover jungle, which the ducks liked because it made them feel protected and safe. So kind of a mess. By 2024, we were weed whipping in the research rows because we just couldn't afford to let the seed bank for these forbs and these noxious weeds build up. So we were weed whipping by 2024, and I think that ultimately you're not going to be able to be a purist about this. I think you're going to combine some mechanical weed management and the ducks, and I think you'll see pretty good success. I'll just give you a second to look over this comparison. On the left are the practices that we use in the control rows to manage weeds and improve fertility. On the right are the duck expenses. And I just want to point out as you look at these numbers that, again, this is the 3 months of the growing season. This is not the whole picture of the duck expenses. This does not give you a complete picture because there's no winter labor included in here. I'm sorry I can't move my tiny head on this screen, but I'll just say that the income from the egg sales, that green highlighted figure there, was $1,575. In the current egg price market, you could probably make more than that, but we could bring in $1,575 in egg sales, which did not offset those gross tract expenses, and we ended up with net expenses of $1,365. So this was not a cost-saving measure. Now, there are also like costs and benefits that we couldn't really figure out how to monetize exactly. But this makes it pretty clear that in terms of cash, it's going to be hard to come out ahead. So just in terms of sharing a few stories of what we learned, which we learned the hard way, and how we responded, I'll just tell you a few stories of the non-refundable tuition we paid in learning about ducks and vineyards. These are hours that we will never get back, but we learned a lot. First of all, the trellis wire problem prevented us from fencing like we wanted to because there was a wire in the vineyard everywhere at 3 feet. We had to fence entire rows. We had to do so much mental geometry every time we wanted to fence and refence and set set the stakes and set the gates. The trellis wires were ridiculous. And at the end of the second season, we ended up putting in 6 hours of labor just removing the 3 foot trellis wires from the research rows so that we could function. Plastic mulch is not gonna set you up to win with the ducks because all of the weeding that they would do and the pooping that they would do is ineffective because there's a barrier between them and the surface of the soil. We also learned, this is an important story, that ducks don't put themselves to bed in the way that chickens do. So if you have chickens, you know that they roost at dusk. They go inside, you shut the door, or maybe you have a timer that shuts the door for you. Ducks do not want to go to bed. They have to be rounded up at night. And the way we get them to go into their houses, we have to sing them a song. And when we sing them a song, they'll all line up and they'll march into their hoop coop. But left to their own devices, they would like to sleep out hiding in the grass, and they don't hide really effectively when they're bright black and white splash ducks, and owls eat them. We lost 3 really nice laying hens to a pair of nesting great horned owls in our woodlot before we committed to going out every single night and putting the ducks to bed. And this, I mean, practically speaking, this adds like 15 minutes of chores to my life every day because I have to walk out to the vineyard, I have to round up the ducks, I have to look for the stragglers, and I have to shut them in so that they don't get eaten by aerial predators by night. We had some pretty serious drought, so I think that affected the control rows. The research rows were pretty happy because we were constantly running hoses and dumping pools out. Labor was really hard to find. We wanted to have our winterized portable coops constructed, and in year 1, it was really hard to find anybody available to do a small, goofy little construction job like that because it takes some real design work. But we did get one built. I'll talk about that in a second. And also, the highly pathogenic avian influenza really cramped our style. We didn't buy any ducks. We didn't bring any new breeding stock because ducks can be carriers of HPAI without becoming symptomatic. So these are some things that we learned about and responded to in the first year. And in the second year, we learned some more because between the first and second year, we had to winter the flock over. It was the most ducks we've ever had on the property, and we needed to have suitable winter housing for them. Watering the ducks in the winter takes some infrastructure and or labor. But the one hack that we came up with that we're pretty chuffed about is that we took all of their summer hoops and we pulled the canvas off and we replaced the canvas with some leftover hoop house plastic that we had from our high tunnel. We had some windstorm damage, so we had to replace our high tunnel plastic. And we just repurposed that to turn their hoops, as you can see in the picture, into little solaria where the ducks could sun themselves and have a snow-free surface in the winter, and they loved it. So we were really glad to get 2 different purposes out of those hoop coops during both the growing season and the off season. One of the things that we learned about those hoop coops is that we're having a lot of straight line wind incidents out here, and the summers are just ridiculously windy. Those things are like kites, those hoop coops. If they catch an 80-mile-an-hour wind, they are going to go across the farm, and I watched it happen. So we've had to stake them down with ground anchors, which is really impractical because then you have to pull the earth anchors out every time you want to rotate the ducks to a new set of rows. For us, this is particularly problematic because our vineyard is a high point on the land of the farm, so there's no shelter. It's really, really windy there, and having to stake the hoop coops down is a real pain. But yeah, we had some more drought, and then we had a pesticide drift incident, and so we sort of wondered if the research was going to mean anything because we've lost whole rows of vines in varieties that were particularly susceptible to the growth regulating hormones that hit our vineyard. We also wondered if the pesticide drift was a health risk to the ducks. So that's been a concern for us. In year 3, I'll say that one of the things that we did for the hoop coops is we added some chick lifts to the hoop coops, which I'll review in the upcoming slides on product reviews and equipment reviews. And the chick lifts really were a game changer. So the next several slides are just going to get into the weeds about ducks. For those of you who are looking at this presentation who have vines and you're wondering about adding ducks, because that's maybe a little more possible than having ducks and thinking about adding vines. But so generally speaking, this is how duckling care goes. You're going to need about 2 hours a day for about 10 weeks. To do chores if you don't let them brood their own clutches of ducklings, and they're going to need supplementary heat. The nice thing about ducklings is, generally speaking, they're healthier than chicks. We've only lost one duckling in these 3 years to inexplicable causes, whereas chicks are a little more fragile. You have to have lots of water because they have to be able to rinse their bill out so that they can breathe through their nares. Niacin deficiency showed up in every single batch of ducklings that we brooded, and it can be solved pretty easily with just a niacin supplement in their water and in their feed. But if you don't know about it, it's pretty serious, and you can lose birds. Protein deficiency is also possible. You cannot start ducks on chick layer and have the right protein. Their feathers aren't going to come in right. Their legs aren't going to get strong enough. So you have to have duckling starter to make sure you have the right protein content. You can put them out in the vineyard once they're about 9 or 10 weeks old, depending on how your weather's going. It takes about 2 bags of starter feed to get 5 ducklings from hatch all the way out to working in the vineyard. And ducklings are super vulnerable to snakes and to aerial predators, also to cats. That whole phrase about like being a sitting duck, it's a real thing. The clear reasons that it's not a labor-saving practice to do this is that there are chores every day. Whereas if we were doing standard like weed management or pest management, we'd be weed whipping and mowing, once a week, or in dry conditions once every other week. And we would, if we sprayed for insects, which we don't do, we would be doing that on a weekly or bi-weekly basis at most. But the duck flock takes daily care. So you should count on, depending on your setup, 15 minutes to half an hour of daily chores. And we do provide rations for each bird, especially when they're not on forage, as the rotation cadence kind of leaves them with less and less to eat in their pen. They have to have deep water, so you have to have buckets or pools. If you're interested in eggs, which we are, just know that there is no roll-away nest box for duck eggs. They aren't even inclined to lay in a crate or anything. So you have to keep them enclosed until late morning so that the eggs are all in one findable spot. Otherwise, every day will be like an Easter egg hunt for real. And again, they don't roost like chickens, and so even though we had hot fence around them, the owls were coming for them at night, so that added a whole extra round of chores at night to round them up and put them in their hoops at dusk. They also need shade from direct sun, and vines do not afford a lot of shade because of the way they're trained and pruned, and so you have to buy a shade cloth and set it up so that they have some protection from hot direct sun. Okay, on to the last part of this talk, just to kind of tell you what we've discovered works in terms of equipments and supplies. We tried pretty much every duck waterer that is out there. by every manufacturer. We had settled on the tripod style water that you see on the right there, but honestly, it's deep enough and short enough that the ducks just spent all day bathing in it, and so all 8 gallons that were in that reservoir would be gone in about 15 minutes, and then we'd have to refill it again. And then we also discovered that that spigot that fills that basin just siphons the dirty duck poopy bath water right back up into the reservoir. So even if they didn't empty it, the water was super gross anyways. So these tripod waterers are not the way to go with ducks. They work okay for chickens because chickens don't take baths. What we ended up doing for all 3 years is just going to the bakery, getting free 5-gallon buckets, cutting holes in the side as you see there, and we fill those with about 6 inches of water. And we do that 2 times a day. If it's hot, sometimes 3 times a day to make sure that they have lots of water, and they work pretty well, and they're free. It does take a lot of trips out there to keep them full. These get a little brittle from UV exposure and from freezing in the winter, but they work even in the winter. If you just fill them up with hot water, if you have a hot water spigot. So highly recommend free buckets over anything you see advertised on the internet. Like everybody who starts with ducklings, we began our duck pool project with kiddie pools, little blue plastic kiddie pools from the local big box store. But those break and you can't lift them up and empty them, and they're just kind of a pain. But ducks need water. They have to be able to bathe. They have to be able to preen. They have to be able to clear their head off after they dabble in the mud. And so we highly recommend utility sleds, especially short, shallow ones. They're really sturdy. They have that kind of aerodynamic shape to the front of them, so that even a person with my upper body strength can come grab a full pool and just lift it from the end and tip it up, and the fertigative water just goes everywhere. And then if you're going to move the ducks, you just empty their pool, then you stack all their feeders and waterers in that sled right there, and you just pull it to where you're going to set the ducks up next. So highly recommend utility sleds, both as pools and as transportation for your rotational practices. 5 stars for electric poultry netting. There are a number of manufacturers. We're really satisfied with the brand that we got. And I'd advise you to get the most powerful solar energizer that you can afford, just for peace of mind, because ducks are super vulnerable. And also, if you're brooding ducklings, be really careful with this electric netting, because even when they're growing out, they can get most of their little body through those smaller lower holes in the netting, but they have little plump bums and they can't get back through, and their wings get stuck, and you can lose ducklings that way. But we had 0 problems with land-based predators, because this electric netting kept our ducks safe for 3 years, way out there in our vineyard. We really love these homemade hoop coops. We use them for chickens and for ducks on the farm. We're getting 2, 3, 4 seasons out of these with minimal maintenance. At first, we were throwing poly tarps from the hardware store on the top of these. Those tear in the wind, so we've switched to canvas, which is a real investment in terms of money, but the canvas is superior. It lasts. These are lasting. We're going on season 4, no problem with our canvas tarps. They do make the hoop coops a little bit heavier. If you have to pay somebody to build it, takes a decent day of labor to put one of these together. It cost us $480 for the materials and for the labor to have each one of these hoops built. Now, depending on what you use for lumber, these can be super heavy. If you put canvas on them, they're going to be even heavier. But once you add, this is just a product advertisement, sorry, because they're the only people who manufacture these. Once you add chick lifts from chicklifts.com, this is a welded pop down dolly that you put, you bolt to the frame of your hoop, and you just step on those, the wheels drop down, and you can pick up the front of the hoop coop with a rope and just drag it wherever you got to go. So we give those chick lifts 5 stars. Again, the hoop coops are not great in high winds. You may end up having to anchor yours down depending on where your vineyard is at. And anchoring them down makes it hard to move them. So I'd love to have somebody design like a lower profile version of a duck coop for places where the wind is going to carry your duck housing off. If you feed your ducks in open pans, the songbirds are going to come and eat all of your feed. So you need to have something covered, especially, in an open setting like a vineyard. Um, we built some duck feeders out of Rubbermaid bins. For the first 2 seasons, we used this cheap version on the left. Uh, it was nice to have it clear because you could see from far away whether the feed needed to be topped up or not. And then we just used peanut butter containers and caulked those into the side, and the ducks can reach in and eat. This deters songbirds. It doesn't really deter mice, but it works pretty good. You have to get peanut butter jars that are big enough for a duck head because their heads are bigger than chickens. But that when it's that big, the sparrows can get in and you can get some spillage out of the side of these bins. So this past season in 2024, we upgraded to the manufactured ports that you can just cut holes for. And we made sturdier ones out of more rugged plastic totes and these manufactured ports for the ducks to put their heads in. And this is just a general review of any equipment that you are going to try to use for a duck in a Minnesota winter, max 3 stars. The extension cords, max 3 stars. The water buckets, they're going to break, they're going to freeze. We have winterizable housing made out of a chopper box there, and it did the trick, but it wasn't great. We loved the turkey-sized automatic door that we got because at least in the winter they tend to go in a little bit more when it's cold. So that automatic door would shut at night, and then we could do rounds and just check on them. The solaria that we made with the high tunnel plastic were pretty great, but pretty much everything is a drag in the winter. And again, that's something that we didn't really go into in terms of collecting data about with this research project, but keep it in mind as you plan to integrate ducks into your perennial crops. And in summary, we're going to keep doing this. The worried look on my face says, is it worth it? We think so. In the future, we're going to increase our flock size. We need to find an ideal stocking density. Right now, what we think is that 40 ducks on 1/10 of an acre do their job in about 3 weeks and should be rotated at 4 weeks. And we're gonna keep toying with those numbers and see whether more ducks do more work. We're gonna watch the long-term impact out there in the vineyard, and it would be worth testing for Campylobacter because that can be carried by ducks. Science would say, why don't you test the duck poop to make sure that your grapes aren't clean just because your ducks are squeaky clean? So maybe we'll do some poop testing. And this year we're going to put the ducks in the whole vineyard. We're not going to have any control rows. They're going to be everywhere. It might be worth investing in plucking equipment suitable for ducks because plucking them by hand makes it impossible. And we're really looking at permanent flock housing adjacent to the vineyard since they spend most of the growing season out there. And for sure, we are going to start charging admission for watching the ducks go to work. It's actually one of my favorite parts of my day is watching the ducks pour out of their hoop coop and go to work in the vineyard. So we're going to keep doing this. And if you'd like to reach out with questions, you can find us on the internet at goodcourage.farm. Feel free to send us a note if you're thinking of doing this yourself. And again, if you are a farmer or a rancher and you're thinking about trying something out at your own place, I highly encourage you to look into your regional SARE farmer rancher grants. And we're grateful to have the opportunity to do this work and to share the results with you.